These are 20 hidden facts about John Wayne's 1963 Western comedy McLintock that reveal how financial desperation, family loyalty, and behind-the-scenes drama created one of the Duke's most successful films. Beyond the slapstick and the famous mud fight lies a production that literally saved Wayne's company from bankruptcy, featured a stunt rebellion, and involved cattle borrowed from a foreign government. For those of us who remember watching McLintock on Saturday afternoon television or catching it at the drive-in during its original run, this film represents pure entertainment, John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara at their best, trading barbs and pratfalls in Technicolor and Panavision. The stories behind the cameras turned out to be just as compelling as anything that made it onto the screen, and most of these facts remained hidden from audiences for decades. Fact number 1. McLintock literally saved John Wayne from financial ruin. The Alamo stands out as John Wayne's passion project from 1960, but the film nearly destroyed him financially in ways most fans never realized. Wayne poured $1.5 million of his own money into that epic, and we're talking $1960 here, which meant he mortgaged his homes and put everything on the line for his vision of the battle for Texas independence. Box office returns came in far below expectations, and Wayne's production company Batjack Productions found itself in serious trouble. The company had to use its entire film library as collateral just to borrow enough money to keep operating, and Wayne desperately needed a hit fast. McLintock became that lifeline. Production costs ran between $3.5 to $4 million, which was manageable money for the time, and according to Michael Wayne, John's son and the film's producer, they were burning through about $50,000 per day during the shoot, so the financial pressure meant they had to work efficiently and get everything right. The gamble paid off in spectacular fashion. North American box office receipts totaled $14.5 million, delivering a return on investment of roughly 360%, and the U.S. theatrical rentals, the actual money that came back to the distributor and production company, hit $7.25 million according to Variety in January of 1964. Wayne could finally reclaim control of Batjack Productions and stabilize his finances. Turner Classic Movies summed it up perfectly when they noted that after Wayne had expended large chunks of both his personal fortune and box office capital with his ill-fated recreation of the fall of the Alamo, he badly needed a project that would let him readily recoup on both fronts. McLintock delivered exactly that and became John Wayne's most popular picture of the entire 1960s, which stands out as a remarkable achievement considering the other classics he made during that decade. Fact number 2. The famous mud wasn't actually mud at all. That climactic mud fight scene used bentonite instead of actual mud, which is a commercial clay typically used in oil well drilling operations. When mixed properly, bentonite has the consistency of chocolate syrup, making it perfect for a scene where dozens of people would be sliding, falling, and wrestling around. What looks like chocolate brown mud on screen was actually chalky gray in real life. Cinematography and Technicolor processing transformed its appearance into that rich, muddy brown we all remember. And the production team chose bentonite because it was smoother and safer than actual mud, which could contain rocks, sticks, and other debris that might injure the actors and stuntmen. Leo Gordon, who played the first person thrown into the mud pit, confirmed that filming this sequence took a full week. 7 days of shooting for one scene meant an enormous investment of time and money, especially when the crew was spending $50,000 per day. But Wayne and director Andrew McLaglen knew this scene would be the film's centerpiece and were willing to take the time to get it right. Fact number 3. The mud scene sparked a genuine stuntman rebellion. Timing made everything worse because the mud fight wasn't filmed during the warm Arizona autumn, but in late November and December when temperatures plummeted at night. The bentonite pit would freeze solid overnight, which meant the crew had to use smudge pots, those oil-burning orchard heaters, to thaw the ice every single morning, and temperatures during filming hovered around 54 degrees Fahrenheit, with cold north winds cutting through the set. One of the takes went bad when a stuntman cut his head on the slide leading into the pit. The professionals put their feet down right then and demanded hazard pay, and these were men who had been jumping off buildings and getting dragged by horses for years, but they drew the line at sliding into freezing bentonite after seeing one of their own get injured. John Wayne's reaction came immediately and explosively. He called them white-livered chicken shits and insisted that diving into that pit was as dangerous as diving into a swimming pool, and according to multiple accounts, Wayne was furious that his stunt team was refusing to do what he considered a simple gag. Wayne didn't just yell at them, though. He did something that would become one of the most famous moments in the film's production history when he ordered Maureen O'Hara to join him in the stunt to shame the entire stunt crew into compliance. Fact number 4. Maureen O'Hara had just undergone surgery when Wayne demanded she slide into the mud. Maureen O'Hara had recently undergone surgery to remove ovarian cysts and was still recovering when Wayne turned to her during the stunt team's rebellion and essentially ordered her to prove the slide was safe. O'Hara's own account reveals she went to stunt coordinator Chuck Roberson and said, "Why, that old bastard wants me to slide down that hill and into that mud pool, and if you say it's safe I'll do it, but not because that old bastard says I must." She didn't refuse the stunt, but she wanted professional confirmation that she wouldn't be seriously injured, which shows the kind of trust these performers had in their stunt coordinators, even when they were angry at their director or producer. Roberson examined the slide carefully, being the professional he was, and assured her it was safe. O'Hara then turned to the stunt team and delivered her own verbal shot when she told them, "Duke's right, and you are a bunch of chickens." Years later in her autobiography, "'Tis Herself," O'Hara reflected on the stunt with a mixture of pride and disbelief, writing that too short and she would have snapped her arms and legs, and if her elbows had not been tucked in tightly enough to her body, she would have broken her arms and shoulders as well, and at 42 years of age you'd think she would have known better. She was risking serious injury just weeks after surgery, and she knew it, but that's the kind of performer Maureen O'Hara was, tough and professional and unwilling to back down from a challenge. And if that kind of old Hollywood toughness and loyalty makes you appreciate these classic films even more, make sure to hit that subscribe button because we've got plenty more stories from the golden age of westerns coming your way. Fact number 5. A male stuntman in drag performed Maureen O'Hara's window jump. O'Hara's willingness to tackle the mudslide didn't extend to every stunt, and there was one the production team absolutely refused to let any woman perform, jumping out of a second-story window. Even the trained stunt women of the era were deemed too valuable to risk on this particular gag. Dean Smith got the job after the production team dressed him in Maureen O'Hara's costume, fitted him with her wig, and had him perform the jump. Close watching of the scene sometimes reveals the substitution, but the costume and wig do a remarkable job of selling the illusion, especially in the wide shots. Hollywood used this as standard practice for decades, particularly for dangerous stunts involving actresses. Male stunt performers often had more experience with high falls and other dangerous work, and insurance companies were more willing to cover them for such risks, which gives us a fascinating glimpse into how Hollywood worked in the early 1960s, when safety standards were different, and certain kinds of dangerous work were considered simply too risky for women, regardless of their skill level. Fact number 6. The Mexican government loaned the production 500 longhorn cattle. The production needed 500 longhorn steers for the big cattle scenes, which created a problem because there simply weren't enough American longhorns available for rent in Arizona at the time. An unexpected source provided the solution when the Mexican government agreed to loan them 500 head of Mexican longhorns. To the untrained eye, a longhorn is a longhorn. Ranchers and cattle experts can tell the difference immediately, though, because Mexican longhorns have horns that tip upward at the ends, while American longhorns have horns that tip downward. And watching the cattle scenes in McLintock with this knowledge reveals the distinctive upward curve of those Mexican horns. International cooperation for a Hollywood production was relatively unusual, and it speaks to the scope and ambition of McLintock that Wayne and his team were determined to make this picture look authentic and spectacular even if it meant negotiating with foreign governments to get the right cattle. Fact number 7. The governor's name was a deliberate political insult. John Wayne never made much of a secret about his conservative political views, and McLintock contains one of his most direct political jabs. The weak, buffoonish governor in the film is named Cuthbert H. Humphrey, and Wayne insisted on this name as a direct parody of liberal Senator Hubert H. Humphrey, whom Wayne intensely disliked. Hubert Humphrey was a prominent Democratic senator from Minnesota and a leading liberal voice in American politics when McLintock was being made. He would later become Lyndon Johnson's vice president in 1965 and would lose the presidential election to Richard Nixon in 1968. Making the governor character incompetent, pompous, and generally useless allowed Wayne to deliver a not-so-subtle message about what he thought of liberal politicians like Humphrey. The character gets portrayed as someone who talks a good game about helping the homesteaders, but doesn't understand the realities of frontier life or the people he's supposed to be serving. Wayne never hesitated to use his films as a platform for his conservative values, and this kind of political commentary was typical of him. Audiences in 1963 who were paying attention to politics would have gotten the joke immediately, and today it's a fascinating historical footnote that shows how deeply Wayne's personal beliefs influenced even his lighter, comedic films. Fact number 8. John Ford may have secretly directed part of the film, or did he? This fact comes with a significant caveat because the truth remains disputed to this day. Stephanie Powers, who played Becky McLintock in the film, claims that legendary director John Ford came to the set and directed for about a week when Andrew McLaglen fell ill during production, and Ford, of course, was one of the greatest directors in Hollywood history, who had directed John Wayne in many of his finest films, including Stagecoach, The Searchers, and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Ford stepping in to help isn't far-fetched when you consider that he and Wayne were extremely close. Ford was like a father figure to Wayne and had been instrumental in making him a star, so if McLaglen had fallen ill and the production was in jeopardy, Ford helping out would be exactly the kind of thing he might do for Duke. Andrew McLaglen firmly denies this story, though. He insists that he was present for the entire shoot and never fell ill during production, and McLaglen has been consistent in this denial over the years, stating clearly that while he had tremendous respect for John Ford, Ford did not direct any part of McLintock. Who's telling the truth remains hard to say. Stephanie Powers has no obvious reason to fabricate the story, and her account is specific about the time frame of about a week, but McLaglen's denial is equally firm and specific, and without additional documentation or confirmation from other cast and crew members, this remains one of those Hollywood mysteries that may never be fully resolved. Ford might have visited the set and offered advice or guidance that Powers interpreted as directing while McLaglen saw it differently, or one of them could simply be misremembering events from over 60 years ago. Fact number 9. McLintock launched Andrew McLaglen into the big time. Whatever the truth about the John Ford story, there's no dispute about what McLintock did for Andrew McLaglen's career. McLaglen had directed only 5 feature films and extensive television work before this film, making him competent and professional but not an A-list director who could handle major productions with huge stars. McLaglen's own words tell the story best. He said, "I'd done 5 features and all this television, so Duke thought maybe I was ready to do a picture with him, and McLintock was my first big picture, and I was pinching myself all over the place." He later added that McLintock put him in the big time. The film's success opened doors for McLaglen that had been closed before. John Wayne was so pleased with his work that he hired him to direct 4 more films: Hellfighters in 1968, The Undefeated in 1969, Chisholm in 1970, and Cahill U.S. Marshal in 1973. And McLaglen also went on to direct other major westerns and action films, establishing himself as a reliable director of large-scale entertainment. The story has a nice symmetry to it. McLaglen was the son of Victor McLaglen, who had won an Academy Award for Best Actor in John Ford's The Informer, and had been a frequent co-star of Wayne's in Ford's Cavalry trilogy and other films. So Wayne had known Andrew McLaglen since he was a boy, and giving him his big break on McLintock was Wayne's way of honoring that long family friendship while also betting on talent he believed in. Fact number 10. Wayne hired Yvonne DiCarlo to help a friend in crisis. Yvonne DiCarlo appears in McLintock as special guest star, playing Mrs. Louise Warren. Her role isn't huge, but it's memorable, and she gets prominent billing, which might make you wonder why someone of DiCarlo's stature, a major star in her own right, would take what amounts to a supporting role in a John Wayne Western. The answer reveals something important about Wayne's character and his loyalty to the people he worked with. Wayne cast DiCarlo because her husband Bob Morgan was a longtime stuntman, and Wayne's friend who had suffered catastrophic career-ending injuries on the film How the West Was Won in 1962. Morgan's accident was horrific. He was doubling for George Peppard in a scene on a moving train loaded with logs when a chain snapped and Morgan was thrown from the train, and he lost a leg, had bones removed from his spine, and his face was severely disfigured. His career as a stuntman was over instantly, and DiCarlo found herself buried in medical bills with no income from her husband's work. Wayne didn't offer charity because that wasn't his style. Turner Classic Movies noted that Wayne was not about charity, but he was legendary for taking care of fellow performers, giving them a payday in his films if they needed it. Because he didn't give jobs, he hired men and women. Casting DiCarlo in McLintock and giving her a good salary allowed Wayne to help the Morgan family through a terrible crisis without making it about pity or handouts, and he was giving her work, which allowed her to maintain her dignity while getting the financial help she desperately needed. Wayne understood that in Hollywood, people's fortunes could change in an instant because he'd nearly lost everything himself with the Alamo. Taking care of DiCarlo and by extension Bob Morgan meant living by the code he portrayed in so many of his films, which was that you take care of your own, and this kind of loyalty and care for fellow professionals was typical of Wayne. Fact number 11. McLintock was a true Wayne family affair. McLintock involved 3 generations of the Wayne family, making it as much a family production as a Hollywood film. John Wayne served as the star and executive producer, wielding enormous power over every aspect of the production, but he didn't keep that power to himself, and instead used the film as an opportunity to advance his children's careers. Michael Wayne served as producer on McLintock, marking his first full producer credit on a major film, and according to interviews, Michael was intimately involved in the day-to-day operations, including managing the budget and keeping production on schedule. His quotes about spending $50,000 per day came from his first-hand knowledge of every expense. Patrick Wayne, John's son, co-starred as Devlin Warren, the young ranch hand who courts Becky McLintock, and Patrick had been acting in films since childhood and would go on to have a solid career in westerns and adventure films. McLintock gave him one of his most prominent roles to date and allowed him to demonstrate his abilities alongside his father and Maureen O'Hara. Young Isa Wayne got into the act too, playing Alice Warren in what was likely her first film role. Having 3 generations of Waynes on set created a unique family atmosphere that extended to the rest of the cast and crew, because this wasn't just a job, it was a family business, and Wayne used it to teach his children the movie-making trade from the ground up. Family involvement also ensured that Wayne had people he trusted implicitly handling the most critical aspects of production. When you're betting your company's future on a film's success, like Wayne was with McLintock, having your son as producer gives you a level of control and trust that you can't get from a hired hand no matter how competent they might be. Fact number 12. Wayne and O'Hara may have had a brief real romance. John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara's on-screen chemistry in McLintock and their other films together was undeniable. They made 5 pictures together and audiences loved watching them spar, fight, and eventually reconcile. But according to O'Hara's grandson Connor Beau Fitzsimons, there may have been more to their relationship than professional respect. Fitzsimons has stated that Wayne and O'Hara may have had a brief real-life romance at one point, but he quickly added that she was way too strong for him, and they would never have been a good couple. This assessment rings true for anyone who knew both performers because O'Hara was famously independent, strong-willed, and unwilling to play second fiddle to any man, while Wayne, despite his tough guy image, preferred more traditional relationships where he was clearly in charge. O'Hara kept a hotel room key as a souvenir with a card that read "Better as Friends," which is a remarkably intimate memento to keep and suggests that something more than friendship had been considered or perhaps even briefly attempted. The fact that she preserved it indicates how important their relationship was to her, even if or especially because it remained platonic. Wayne himself spoke about O'Hara in terms that went beyond the usual Hollywood publicity when he said, "There's only one woman who has been my friend over the years, and by that I mean a real friend like a man would be, and that woman is Maureen O'Hara because she's big, lusty, and absolutely marvelous. Definitely my kind of woman, and she's a great guy." That last line, "she's a great guy," reveals Wayne's highest form of compliment. He was saying that O'Hara had the qualities he most valued, which were strength, loyalty, straightforwardness, and courage, and their friendship lasted until Wayne's death in 1979. Fitzsimons revealed that his grandmother's reaction to Wayne's death was the only time he ever saw her cry. Consider what that means. O'Hara was a woman who had lived through poverty, professional struggles, a difficult marriage, and all the challenges of being a strong woman in mid-century Hollywood. But the death of John Wayne was the only time her grandson saw her weep, and that tells you everything you need to know about how deep their connection went. Fact number 13. The coal shovel spanking was real and left O'Hara black and blue. The infamous coal scuttle shovel spanking scene stands out as one of the most controversial moments in McLintock, especially when viewed through modern eyes. Wayne's character paddles O'Hara's character through the streets while a crowd cheers, and it's a scene that many modern critics note has not aged well. But most people don't realize that the coal scuttle shovel used in the scene was completely real, and John Wayne didn't pull his strokes. O'Hara stated clearly in the 2005 DVD special features that "he really spanked me and my bottom was black and blue for weeks." This wasn't movie magic or careful camera angles making it look more violent than it was, because Wayne was actually hitting her with a metal coal shovel hard enough to leave serious bruising that lasted for weeks. Modern standards make this seem almost unbelievable. The liability issues alone would shut down any production that tried this today, but in 1962 and 63 when McLintock was being filmed, the attitude toward such things was very different, and performers were expected to take their lumps for the sake of authenticity, while safety standards were nowhere near what they are today. O'Hara's willingness to endure this treatment, and her matter-of-fact way of discussing it decades later, shows the kind of toughness that made her a star. She wasn't complaining or expressing regret, but simply stating a fact, which was that Wayne hit her hard, it hurt, and she was bruised for weeks, and that was the job and she did it. Fact number 14. The film is filled with visible historical inaccuracies. McLintock is set in 1895, and the production team did make efforts to create period-appropriate costumes and settings, but looking closely reveals numerous historical inaccuracies that slipped through, and some of these are minor while others are quite obvious once you know what to look for. Krag Jorgensen carbines appear visible in several scenes, but these rifles weren't issued by the military until 1894, which means the absolute earliest the film could be set is 1896 if we're being generous, and this places a hard floor on the timeline that contradicts the 1895 setting. Pay attention to the men's trousers throughout the film because many of them have belt loops, which seems like a minor detail until you realize that belt loops weren't invented until 1921. Prior to that, men wore suspenders or used buttons inside their waistbands to hold up their pants, so every pair of pants with belt loops in McLintock is an anachronism. An Arizona state flag appears visible in the court scene, but Arizona didn't even become a state until 1912 and the state flag wasn't created until 1917. Seeing that flag in a film set in 1895 is a glaring error for anyone who knows their Western history. Saguaro cacti appear visible in several outdoor scenes, which is for the botanists and desert experts in the audience. Saguaros only grow naturally in Arizona and Mexico, which would be fine except that the story is supposedly set in the Mesa Verde area, which is in Colorado, and Mesa Verde is high country terrain where saguaros don't grow. The presence of these iconic desert cacti immediately tells knowledgeable viewers that the location is wrong. These inaccuracies don't ruin the film, of course. McLintock was always meant to be entertainment, not a documentary, but they do provide interesting talking points for Western enthusiasts who like to spot such things. Fact number 15. The Native American dialogue uses the wrong language. The scenes involving the Comanche characters include a greeting they use, which is Yatahe, and that's a perfectly good Native American greeting, but unfortunately it's a Navajo word, not Comanche. The correct Comanche greeting would be Maruave. Hollywood westerns of the era committed this kind of error extremely often. Most productions didn't employ Native American consultants or take the time to get the languages right, and as long as it sounded vaguely Indian to general audiences, that was considered good enough, which today we recognize as cultural insensitivity at best and outright disrespect at worst. McLintock was filmed largely in Arizona near Navajo territory, so it's quite possible that the production hired Navajo extras or consultants and simply used the Navajo language for convenience, not realizing or caring that Comanche and Navajo are completely unrelated languages from different language families. This would be like using French dialogue for German characters, and to someone who doesn't speak either language it might sound European and close enough, but to speakers of those languages the error is immediately obvious and jarring. This mistake stands as a reminder of how Hollywood treated Native American cultures in the 1960s, as interchangeable props for Western stories rather than as distinct peoples with their own languages, customs, and histories. Fact number 16. Jerry Van Dyke's banjo playing was deliberately terrible. Jerry Van Dyke plays Matt Douglas Jr., and in one scene his character plays the banjo, which makes this interesting because Jerry Van Dyke was actually an expert banjo player in real life, and he could have played that scene perfectly if he wanted to. Van Dyke deliberately plays completely out of rhythm instead. Watching carefully reveals that his hand movements don't match the music you're hearing at all, and he's intentionally playing badly to serve the character because Matt Douglas Jr. is supposed to be an enthusiastic but not particularly talented young man, and Van Dyke's out-of-rhythm playing sells that characterization perfectly. This kind of subtle character work separates good actors from adequate ones. Van Dyke could have played the scene with his actual banjo skills and called it a day, but instead he made a conscious choice to play poorly for comedic effect and character consistency. And it's a small moment, but it shows the level of craft that went into even the minor roles in McLintock. Musicians and people who pay attention to such details find this kind of thing delightful to discover. It's a reminder that even in a big, broad comedy like McLintock, the actors were thinking about their characters and making choices to serve the story rather than show off their own skills. Fact number 17. The Gordon Jones underwater prank. The mud fight sequence produced another great story that shows John Wayne's sense of humor and his willingness to teach a lesson to actors who weren't pulling their weight. Gordon Jones, who had a supporting role in the film, refused to go fully underwater in the mud pit during his scene. This irritated Wayne, who saw it as unprofessional because if you're in a comedy mud fight scene you commit to it fully, so Wayne came up with a plan. Wayne secretly instructed stuntman Rudy Robbins that when we knock Gordon in there, I want you to land on top of him and shove him all the way to the bottom because he's being a butt about it. Robbins, being a professional stuntman who followed orders, did exactly that, and when Jones hit the bentonite, Robbins landed on top of him and pushed him all the way under. Jones came up from that mud madder than a hornet, according to the accounts, sputtering and furious, but he was also thoroughly dunked and the shot worked perfectly. Wayne got what he wanted for the scene. Jones learned that you don't refuse to commit to a gag in a John Wayne picture, and the audience got a funnier moment than they would have if Jones had done it his way. This story perfectly encapsulates Wayne's approach to filmmaking. He was the boss, he knew what he wanted, and he wasn't above using a little trickery to get it, but he didn't do it to be cruel because he did it to serve the picture, and to teach people to be professionals. Fact number 18. Chuck Roberson's nickname had a colorful origin. Chuck Roberson served as the stunt coordinator on McLintock, and there's an interesting detail about Roberson that tells you something about the culture of Hollywood stuntmen in the golden age of westerns. Roberson was known as Bad Chuck, to distinguish him from another prominent stuntman named Chuck Hayward, who was known as Good Chuck. You might assume this was about their work ethics or their stunt abilities, but according to Maureen O'Hara herself, the nickname came from Roberson's legendary reputation with women and his active nightlife. O'Hara noted this fact in the DVD commentary with a mixture of amusement and respect. Bad Chuck wasn't a judgment on his character or his professional abilities, quite the opposite in fact, because Roberson was one of the most respected stuntmen in the business, known for his skill, his safety consciousness, and his ability to coordinate complex action sequences, and the bad in his nickname was more about his offset persona and his reputation as someone who enjoyed the Hollywood nightlife to the fullest. Colorful nicknames like this were common among the tight-knit community of stuntmen who worked on westerns in the 50s and 60s. These men spent months at a time on location away from home, working dangerous jobs, and living in a world that was equal parts professional craftsmen and frontier rowdiness, so nicknames like Bad Chuck and Good Chuck were terms of affection that acknowledged both men's skills while also recognizing their different personalities. Fact number 19. The film entered the public domain due to a massive congruent oversight. McLintock entered the public domain in 1991 when Batjack Productions failed to renew the copyright in the 28th year after the film's original release. This was a massive oversight that cost the Wayne estate and Batjack millions of dollars in potential revenue. Batjack Productions vs. Good Times Home Video, a legal case in 1994, confirmed the film's public domain status, but there's an important caveat because while the film itself is in the public domain, the music score by Frank DeVol remains copyrighted. This creates an unusual legal situation where anyone can distribute the film, but they have to be careful about the music. Dozens of cheap DVD versions of McLintock can be found at various stores and online retailers because of this public domain status. These are public domain editions often sourced from old video masters or television prints, and the quality on these releases varies from watchable to terrible, but they're perfectly legal to sell because the film is in the public domain. Batjack still retains the original camera negatives and exclusive rights to officially restored versions though. Paramount released the film on Blu-ray in May of 2014 using a 4K remaster from the original negative, creating the definitive version of the film, and the difference in quality between the public domain versions and the official restoration is dramatic, so this is the version serious collectors and fans should seek out. Modern copyright laws have automatic renewal provisions that prevent this kind of accidental forfeiture, which is worth noting because copyright law changed significantly after this kind of oversight became common. For films like McLintock that were made under the old system though, these oversights occasionally happened even to major productions. Fact number 20. JFK's funeral procession passed a theater showing McLintock. McLintock connects to one of the most tragic moments in American history through an eerie coincidence that was captured on camera. The film was released on November 13, 1963, and was playing in theaters when President Kennedy was assassinated on November 22, just 9 days later. Cameras captured the flag-draped casket being carried through Washington during the televised funeral procession for President Kennedy. One shot clearly shows a movie theater with McLintock on the marquee, and this haunting juxtaposition of a John Wayne Western comedy advertising above one of the most solemn moments in American history was preserved in the news footage and has been noted by historians and Kennedy assassination researchers ever since. Many Americans who saw McLintock during its original run found that this coincidence created a strange mental connection between the film and those dark November days in 1963. Some theater owners temporarily closed or changed their programming out of respect, while others stayed open believing that people needed entertainment and distraction more than ever during a national tragedy. The film's light-hearted comedic tone was both completely inappropriate for the national mood and perhaps exactly what some people needed. McLintock offered 2 hours and 7 minutes of escapism, laughter, and the reassuring presence of John Wayne, exactly the kind of American icon that felt comforting during a time of uncertainty and grief. Movies exist not in isolation but as part of the larger historical moment, and this coincidence serves as a reminder of that truth. McLintock will forever be connected to November of 1963, when it was both a major box office success and a strange accidental witness to presidential tragedy. 20 hidden facts about McLintock reveal a production far more complex and interesting than the light-hearted comedy on screen might suggest. Financial desperation met physical danger, political satire combined with personal loyalty, and family involvement collided with historical tragedy, all of which embodies the spirit of 1960s Hollywood and the determination of John Wayne to succeed on his own terms. The film saved Wayne's company from bankruptcy, launched Andrew McLaglen's career, provided work for people in need, and created a family affair that involved 3 generations of Waynes. Real physical comedy left actors bruised and battered, stunts required male performers in drag, and a mud fight sparked a rebellion among some of Hollywood's toughest professionals. Political messages mix with historical inaccuracies and cultural blind spots that tell us as much about the 1960s as they do about the 1890s. A strange twist of copyright law and historical coincidence made the film both a public domain property and an accidental witness to one of America's darkest days. Those of us who grew up watching McLintock on television or saw it during its original theatrical run find that these facts add new layers of appreciation to a film we already loved. Every pratfall, every line of dialogue, every shot of those Arizona landscapes carries with it these hidden stories of the people who made it and the challenges they overcame. John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara gave us a film that's endured for over 6 decades, entertaining new generations while remaining a comfort watch for those who remember when it was new. That's a legacy worth celebrating, and these facts give you new reasons to revisit this classic Western comedy. Hit that like button if you enjoyed learning these hidden facts about McLintock. Leave a comment sharing your own memories of this film, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future videos. Thanks for watching, and happy trails!